Good evening and welcome to Live United, where we have an opportunity to share stories and a little bit of history about some of the great services and efforts going on here in the Monadnock region to address the well-being of people that live here. And today I'm joined by Keith Tebow. Keith is the Chief Development Officer at Southwestern Community Services. And thanks for joining us, Keith.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Keith is here to talk about some really interesting pieces in relation to your community mission,
Sure.
in particular. But SCS is in Southwestern Community Services. I think everybody knows it as SCS.
A lot of people do, sure.
SCS has quite a history here in the Monadnock region. So can you tell us really how did it all begin?
Sure.
And where are you at now?
Okay, that's a big question, and the reason being is that we have a big anniversary coming up. August 22nd, I believe it is, in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the authorization that started community action, and so it's the 50th year of community action being available. Southwestern Community Services and the other community action agencies across New Hampshire were actually began in 1965. So we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of President Johnson's war on poverty legislation this year, but you'll see a whole lot more coming next year. I'm actually on a statewide committee that's going to celebrate the work we've done throughout the years, and so we've been around for nearly 50 years. We're a pretty diverse nonprofit organization, meaning we have a mission to assist those who are low to moderate income, senior, handicapped, and the like. But we do that in a variety of ways. We have a WIC nutrition program that helps moms of young children and pregnant moms with nutritional issues. We've got fuel assistance, LIHEAP fuel assistance, which assists over 4,000 households to help with their fuel every year, be it wood, coal, gas, or whatever. We run the Head Start program in the region. Several hundred children every year and their families are served through that program. We weatherize homes. We assist folks who are developmentally disabled. We have New Hope, New Horizons. And many of these programs have been around for almost all those 50 years. And what I've been doing since 1993 is trying to bring a small amount of permanently affordable housing to the region. We've managed to create I think the number is just top 450 units in 15 different southwestern New Hampshire communities. So we're a relatively diverse organization. We don't pigeonhole ourselves. Most recently, we're very excited about supportive services for veterans and their families, a new program that we brought on last year that assists veterans and their families with almost any issue they might have, be it rent payments, utility payments, and the like. As we all know, there's a real need relative to veterans who are either returning from service or maybe have served as far back as the Vietnam War or before, that really could use a little bit of help. Many of the issues that they might be suffering from right now are related to the fact that they served our country and they served all of us. So we've got older programs, and we're always looking for new ways to meet the needs in our community. And they're ever-changing. Community action, although it's broad, it goes across the whole country. As one can imagine, the needs in, say, New Mexico might be very different than the needs in rural New Hampshire. So one of the very powerful things about community action is that we can tailor our program to the needs of our area. Back in the early 1990s, our board of directors and our staff saw that there was a real need, particularly in our smaller communities, for some affordable housing. A lot of it was concentrated here in Keene, but much of it was, but there was needs everywhere. So we had small communities like Troy and Hinsdale and Jaffrey who they were supportive of bringing in some affordable housing, but they didn't have a staff or the wherewithal to do it themselves. So SCS sort of stepped up at that time, and those three communities, and North Walpole another, were some of our early ventures into doing small developments, 12 units, 16 units, that amount. We're not coming in and inundating a town with affordable housing, but we build to the size and scale of the community we're working in. But we particularly focused our efforts on the outer not just here in the Keene, but the whole Monadnock region, trying to spread that out a little. As such, we brought those assets to the communities, but also maybe took a little bit of the pressure off of Keene itself, because Keene is the hub, and more goes on here as a rule anyway. But these little assets, and they really serve the communities well. And it's a mixture. About half of our units are workforce, available to young families, and about half are for seniors, for those, in some instances, 55 and up, or some 62 and up. But we've got those in all those different communities that I spoke to as well.
So you're really covering a need related to both workforce housing, I know, in the region. You're also doing, I think, the Second Chance program.
Second Chance
You're
for Success,
involved
thank
with
you.
that?
Yes, that was a development that came about basically because of a chance conversation we had with some county officials who were lamenting the fact that the recidivism rate was very high in the region, as high as 80%, which is very surprising, meaning that about 80% of those who were being released from the Cheshire County House of Correction were coming back. And they felt that the need really was related to their housing in a lot of instances. We were lamenting the fact at the same time that about 30% of those residing in our emergency housing shelters in the region were recently released from the House of Correction. And we know we weren't serving them well there. They were part of a larger population that reside in those shelters. So we began the work of fundraising and creating a program. The county conveniently had a nice piece of land available right on the site of the House of Correction. And so we reached out to our partners at New Hampshire Housing and at the Community Development Finance Authority, and we amassed enough funds to put up a 6-unit, 12-bedroom, what ultimately could be a 24-bed facility, independent living. These folks are all released from the House of Correction, but many of them are on probation or are being monitored in some fashion. But a safe, secure, sober environment was exactly what folks needed. There was one of our earlier tenants spoke at our open house we had for Second Chance for Success, and mentioned that his only true option for housing was to go home. And unfortunately, his whole family used, and they were enablers, and he said that would have been the worst place for me to go, which is a very surprising fact. So what he needed was a secure, sober environment that he could count on, and he's got that. And we've been open a little over a year. It has been full since almost the beginning. It has had extenuating circumstances happen. There's reports from the actual House of Correction that because those who are incarcerated know this exists and know that the only way to get in is to show motivation to change their behaviors in their lifestyle, there's an uptick in the behavior at the House of Correction as a result of this option being available to folks when they leave. Folks are aspiring to live there because they know that's what they need. So when we talk about the development of housing of different sorts in the region, there are consequences that go far beyond the housing, and that's sort of part of my story, is that it's always more than housing. People sort of see it as one facet, but it goes beyond that, and Second Chances is just a shining example. We've had 3 different counties now in the state talk to us about trying to replicate that same concept. The concept isn't new, that halfway house concept, but I think the major programming that we bring in, the local NBT bank comes in and does financial management classes for folks. We have something called Tenancy 101 that just teaches folks how to be a good tenant, and that existed previous to Second Chance. But when you bring it right in and you have an audience that's ready, willing, and able to accept it, it can make some real differences in the lives of those people, the lives of the community members, of the community where they ultimately reside, because this is transitional. It's meant to be 3 to 18 months, get them on their feet, help them find employment, give them some skills, and then bring them back in the community. Prior to Second Chance being around, they were released from the House of Correction with what they came in with, literally, and they went out into the community with very little preparation. And I give a lot of credit to the county and the current set of officials at the county, because they recognize that was not the best way to release prisoners, and so they make an active effort now to bring programs at the House of Correction to help us with things like Second Chance and to reduce that recidivism rate. And ultimately that'll reduce the cost to every county taxpayer. The less people we can have in that facility, the better.
And I think that's a really important message for us to get across to people is that all of these types of things impact our economy,
Sure.
impact the education of these young people who are our future in the
Absolutely.
workplace. So it's really all geared towards, lifetime success,
Absolutely.
ultimately for people. And, you mentioned that you're working with vets, you're working with the folks from House of Corrections, you work with the seniors, and I know you have some very interesting projects going on over in Swansea. And
We do.
I want to make sure we get to that because I think
Okay.
some of what's happened there is truly, really is a great story that exemplifies how this has far-reaching impact in the lives of people and in people that it wasn't even directly designed to serve.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit
Sure.
about perhaps the senior housing first
Okay.
over in Swansea.
All right, over in North Swansea, we have a 38 unit, if you will, 38 apartment rental development known as Page Homestead. And it's just as you go down Route 12. It's on Route 12 before the fairgrounds and after the Kia dealership. On actually it's a Ford Roundtree, Ford on the right hand side, right almost smack dab between those two. There's a property you can't see it from Route 12. It's conveniently designed to be within a wonderful little wooded area. But it's 38 units. It was developed using a HUD 202 grant, but it also had a community development block grant that was sponsored by the town of Swansea, which really is what made the difference. The issue we faced there is we had 38 units. It's not a small development. It's one of the largest we've ever done. It is for seniors. It's for low-income seniors. But we didn't have public water and public sewer to that site. It was right down by the Ford dealership. It was there. What the West Swansea Water Company has water system, public water system, and the town of Swansea has sewer there, but it didn't get to us. So we approached the town about a block grant, which they sponsored for us. We were successful in the competition, but what that block grant paid for was extending the water and sewer lines. It's either up or down Route 12, however you want to look at it, about a third of a mile to our site, and then brought onto our site. But we intentionally sized the water pipe itself to serve more than just the development. What we were able to do there is there are 5 sites, all undeveloped, but zone business, that this water pipe moved past. So we stubbed off each of those properties with a water and a sewer connection potential, so that in the future, the future development of those sites is incredibly enhanced. It's because they have public water and public sewer. So those owners of those sites were not the intended persons to assist. We were trying to assist low-income seniors, but at the same time, the owners of those sites now have sites that are much more developable. It's in the area that's zone business for the town of Swansea. So at no cost to those owners except for the stubs, and no cost to the town, we've made sites that are already zone business much more desirable and developable as business sites. So the potential for development is increased. The town is likely to see an increase in assessed value, which every town strives for, and they didn't have to extend those pipes themselves. The cost was borne through a grant we were able to get through the state's Community Development Finance Authority. And then there's one particular gentleman who owns the Hidden Springs Mall, who, when he had developed that 25 years ago, presumed he was going to be able to get sewer to his site, but he was on the other. The sewer was on one side of Route 12, and his site was on the other. But for very little cost, he was able to extend and get on the sewer system as well. That property had a septic tank. He didn't even have a septic system because he thought he'd be getting sewer. So that tank, he had at cost to that business owner, had to get that tank pumped weekly. So we were able to alleviate his issue. We were able to bring potential development to that area of Swansea, in an area where the town wants to see development. And we've got 38 very happy seniors living in beautiful apartments. It is really the architect that we chose for that particular development did a very nice job. They think they're living in a 5-star hotel. I have to tell you, we were able to build it correctly, efficiently, but we've got, again, 38 seniors who would be living elsewhere, probably in certainly less desirable conditions than where they are now. So they're happy, the town is happy, and Southwestern did something that was more than just housing. It's kind of become my mantra. What we do as part of our housing development is I view it as community development. I'm always looking for something that we're doing that brings added value to the fact that we're bringing some homes, some housing into an area. So that particular one is very close to my heart. I live in Swansea, and I'm on the Swansea zoning board. So when you work in your own hometown, you've really got to make sure you step it up a bit and bring something more than just what appears there. So it's been a very successful development for us.
And I know you're doing that across the region in several locations where you're providing that kind of assistance. And I really want to highlight for our audience that this meets a direct need that's been highlighted here in the region in relation to our seniors who we know are one of our high-risk poverty populations.
And
that
growing.
they are really struggling to make ends meet. Providing housing and those basic needs is just so critical for that age of population.
The population is growing, Kelly. New Hampshire Housing just released a report that said that the number of folks age 65 and above between now and 2025, 10 years from now roughly, will double. The demographics are astounding. And again, not all of them are in a low socioeconomic group, but the numbers of all seniors is going to grow. It's just the natural progression of the baby boom. And so what happens is folks who are senior, and what we're able to provide is the choices of where they can live financially, but also physically, are limited. If you look at most of the housing that exists in our region, you've got to walk up at least several steps just to get in the house. The bedrooms are on the second floor. It's older housing stock, so the doorways are not wide. The bathrooms are intentionally small, because oftentimes the house was built before there was plumbing, so they sort of made a water closet out of into a bathroom. None of those are conducive to someone in a wheelchair or with a walking disability. So the idea of what we're doing is critical, that we are able to provide never enough, but at least a moderate amount of housing that is accessible. A person in a wheelchair or has a walking disability can function there in a respectful, dignified manner. They're living in conditions that are suitable to their need. And as that number grows, the fact that we've sort of jumped a little bit ahead of the curve here in the Monadnock region and provided this kind of housing, which I've been doing personally since 1993. Keene Housing is doing a whole lot of that as well. We're providing for the future by acting now. And that's an economic issue, because those communities that have taken these steps, both for senior housing and workforce housing, will be better able to deal with that demographic shift that we're going to see, because you're going to have housing for those very folks who are in the demographic we're talking about. But we've also got housing for those who work in that field. Because if you want to have a high-quality medical facility in your community, which most folks, particularly the seniors, demand, you've got to have places for the people who are working in the laundry area, and you've got to have housing available for those who are at the entry level working in those facilities. So if you want to have that and need that, and if you want to have a vibrant downtown and a plethora of businesses, diverse businesses, you want to have a good coffee shop, you've got to have housing available for those people who are making the wages to work in that coffee shop. And I'd like to say that many years ago, then Mayor Blastos commissioned a report that set the tone for all of this, and he was brave enough at the time, because that was a time when a lot of folks thought housing was negative. It was like, brought too many children into our school system. It's going to bankrupt the communities. He just stood up in the face of that and said, no, housing, a diverse, balanced supply of housing for this region is critical. He saw it as an economic issue, and we've been able to work under that climate ever since, and it's been very, very fortunate that we've had that happening.
Yes, and that was part of what I wanted to also, really put out there, is that not only are you addressing that senior population, the low-income population, but our workforce,
Sure.
Who is truly challenged, and we know from the research that's been done and the reports that are available out there that we have an out-migration of our young people.
That's right.
We have a growing population of people that are aging.
That's right.
Out of the workforce, but we want to keep those young people here too.
You do.
And, providing that housing and that kind of stability where people feel their needs can be met so that they can work in the jobs in the area, that is absolutely critical.
It is. It is critical, and again, it's critical that we do this consistently, that we create these opportunities consistently. In another Swansea development that we did a few years ago now, but it's just as relevant today, was brought upon because the town manager then, Beth Fox, called myself and our executive director in and for a meeting, and we weren't sure what she was going to ask us to do, but we came in, and she after sort of a little bit of nervous chit chat said, why do you want to, when we asked him, well, Beth, why did you ask us in? She goes, well, Board of Selectmen and I have been talking, and we think we need more affordable housing in Swansea. Well, our jaws dropped, because that's just not the reaction you generally get. It's usually the other way around. They try to keep you out. But the very forward-thinking community said, I think we'd like to work with Southwestern to bring some more in. And so, again, once we picked our jaws up off the floor and began to talk to her about it, they had some sites in mind, and we investigated them. And as it turned out, there was a great site right in the village of West Swansea. It was an 8-acre parcel, but you wouldn't know it. There was a small 4-unit apartment building already on it, and the owner was looking to sell it. But it had development potential. It's right near the Denman-Thompson Bridge. The property actually circles the fire station that is in West Swansea. So when we began to investigate that site, we had a similar issue that we had in Page, and that is we didn't have a public water supply, except that right across the river in the former Brown textile mill was a public water system, a community water system existed right there. We could see it. But we couldn't get it, at the time, we sort of were a bit flummoxed as to how to get the water from one side of the river to the other. So the concept of directional drilling was explained to me. So what we ultimately did is we hired a company as part of this development to drill under the river directionally. Like, we were able to do it. They could see it on a computer. And then, in essence, and I was there the day they began to latch onto the water pipe and pull it back down through, which was fascinating thing to watch. This snake, about this big around, inching its way back down through the river to connect up to the public water system. Well, because we're all about community development and more than housing, we intentionally, again, sized that pipe so that it could serve, ultimately, the entire village of West Swansea with public water. The town hasn't taken those steps yet because I think the main issue is the well system itself needs some upgrades to be able to do it. But two things can happen when that happens, is that we can get public water to an entire village, and then there's also a dry hydrant system that exists in the West Swansea village. By dry hydrant, I mean that the hydrant system's all around, but there's no water in it. When there's a need, the fire department will hook up to the system with a tanker truck and a pumper, and they'll drop a hose basically in the Ashwillet River, and they'll start to feed work the fire. Well, what we can do when this system gets upgraded to the next level is they already have the waters there. They can fire up that water system in the hydrant system, and ultimately that should lead to lower insurance rates for everyone who lives in the village. So we've done something here that is way beyond housing. A lot of unintended beneficiaries can and will benefit from the fact that there's an affordable housing development in their village. So again, still being Swansea, in this instance, we're able to bring more than just housing and bring community development, true community development, to that little village of West Swansea, much like we did in North Swansea with the Page Homestead development. The one in Swansea, the workforce housing development, is Swansea Township. Now, it's 18 units. It's not a lot, but it's what's necessary to start to move in the direction of, that was 4 units originally, but on an 8-acre site. And ultimately, it will and has been providing housing for the workforce of our area, which again is a critical economic issue to our area, because most of these are not subsidized developments that per se that we develop. The workforce housing is generally not subsidized, meaning those folks, they're working in the region. Interestingly, I once took some photographs of our sites for a PowerPoint for our board of directors to kind of show them where we are. And at one of our senior sites, when I snapped the picture, there happened to be a school bus there. And so at the board meeting, that we had, there was a question. Well, this is a senior housing development. Why is there a school bus there? You know, there's no children living there. And I said, no, but one of the folks that lives in there, she's 64 years old. She drives a school bus. She works for the school department, school system, and that's happened to be in Winchester. So there's a definitely benefit to doing what SCS has been doing under just our housing umbrella for all these years, the assistance we've been able to bring to our housing development. So we're finding ways to benefit our communities that work far beyond just the housing that we're creating, which is vital in and of itself. But we look for ways to work with our communities beyond what is obvious that's right there. But many folks don't see it. You know, when folks don't know there's a big snake under the Ashwellet River that is potentially could feed a whole lot of folks with the public water.
Well, and I'm guessing that people may not know where you're working either. You know, and you're across the region.
We are. We are
Working in communities. So if somebody really was looking for housing, was in need of that, how would they go about accessing?
The best way to do it right now, and the way that everything's being done right now, is through our website. www.scshelps.org is our website, and all of our housing vacancies, all of our housing developments in general are listed there with pictures, and then the ones that have vacancies are also listed. So, and there, I believe our application is available to download and print, and it's a relatively detailed application, so it's something someone would want to start working on right away. But that's really the easiest, best way. Our primary office phone number is 352-7512, and that's fine to use as well. But if someone wants to sort of, you know, in their bunny slippers, want to kind of see what it is that SCS has for housing in the region, and it's everywhere. It's from Hinsdale. We actually do work up in Sullivan County as well, but it's really in our region. It's from you know, Hinsdale to North Walpole, and it's from Jaffrey to Keene. I mean, we have developments relatively small in all of those areas and beyond. We're currently working on a very exciting development, personally, down in Marlborough. A number of years ago, Jeff Miller, who was the then current chair of the campaign, the United Way campaign, gave me a call one day and said, you know, we're about to vacate the Marlborough Elementary School. Our new school's just about ready. And that had been a struggle for that community to get approval to build that new school, but they got it. But there was a committee of the school board that was working on how to repurpose the old school. It's a large, sort of sprawling building that is tucked in a little corner off of Main Street. And so Jeff said, you know, he gave me the name of another person to call, and so the United Way was the actual genesis of this development, I have to tell you. And I was, of course, working as someone raising funds, as a person of trying to raise some funds. So Jeff and I had reason to see each other a lot, but off topic, he called me, and so I met with some folks. We had a very large, well-attended public meeting, and we came to an agreement with the school district that senior housing in that building would be the very best thing for it. It was the highest and best use. So we began our own efforts to fundraise. It took us a couple rounds of funding to get funding, because it's the funding that we go after is competitive, and you're never guaranteed anything. But we put the package together, and I'm happy to say that on or about July 15th, we'll be occupying a building that is a mix of the old and new. We kept the original 1936 brick high school, which is a sort of simple but stunning building, and we built 24 new units all the way around that building. And so all the units that folks will live in is going to be brand newly built, and we're going to preserve the original school that was there. That building, because of its size, because of its relatively small amount of parking it had, wouldn't have lent itself to many other purposes. The neighbors around that building were incredibly pleased that there was a plan for it, because it was going to be a white elephant. It was going to be maybe an attractive nuisance to rock throwers and things, you know, very attractive windows to target. But so the neighborhood, the community, the school district in general was instrumental and very pleased to help bring this development to that community. And We will have an open house later on this year, and I urge folks to come out because we found out that the word was grim when we actually started to demo some of the older building. Marlboro has a rich history in their schools. They really do have, for a small community, they have a real commitment to education in their schools, and their sports teams were prolific. When that was the high school, they would graduate 12 and 13 people, but win state championships. So they really took their school. It was a very center of their community. So I was told by a neighbor when we began the demolition, there was a lot of sort of grim people that showed up and just watched the demolition happen. But the good news is that we're going to bring more than housing to Marlboro, because we're going to bring the repurposing of an asset to that community to serve an element that's really needed, where we've got some openings, but I know the majority of the apartments were not even opened are already committed. So it's if folks are interested in that, I urge them to give us a call or to check out our website or to present themselves in some fashion, because we will again be bringing a really good, really well designed and well built asset to the community of Marlboro, and that one is 62. Those are 62 and up. So it's
Oh, that's fabulous. I
Yeah.
love to hear that you've repurposed a building too.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I'm curious about, and I would imagine our audience is also, is, you've talked about the need that's out there. Are we meeting that need? Is there enough housing? Is there enough senior housing in the region, and is there enough workforce housing? And you talked
No.
about vets.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, the answer is there might be enough housing, but oftentimes the condition of that housing is less than desirable. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the state right around here. That means a lot of lead paint. We have a lead paint program, remediation program at Southwestern that helps with that issue. We don't never enough resources to hit all of it. So we're not in critical, desperate need, because the work of SCS and Keene Housing over the years, and private developers have at least recognized the need and have begun to meet it. But I think what we're going to face in the next phase, the next 10 to 15 years, is retrofit what we have. We have a lot of housing that is aged, and it's in desperate need of repurposing. Part of New Hampshire Housing's most recent report shows the disconnect. What we have an aging population, but we've got a whole lot of housing that doesn't fit at their needs. It's the 3-bedroom, 2-story house that doesn't fit the needs of an aging population. So I think where our needs lie today is, don't stop creating the new, but let's pay attention to what we actually have and find resources to go into neighborhoods, maybe target neighborhoods that have an older housing stock, and go in and provide some resources, maybe some low-cost loans to the owners. Because the other thing we're seeing in the community, the market respond. In the last several years, we've had several hundred, if many hundreds of beds being developed for students. We have Arcadia Hall, we have the former Monadnock paint and wallpaper store. There's a new development being proposed for the former Perkins Lumber Building on Ralston Street, and that's all the market responding to the need. Many of those students have been living in our neighborhoods, in that ever-expanding sort of college presence. Having a college in our community is a tremendous asset. I mean, there's no question about that. And they bring much more than the positives far outweigh the negatives. But one of the negatives is that they've put an unusual demand on our housing stock, and because there was a ready supply of students coming in every fall, local landlords were able to take advantage of that in a good way. With new beds coming on, we're seeing a bit of a softening in that market, which is good in a couple of reasons. One is more housing may be available for our working families, which previous to Keene State becoming so prolific was where our workers lived. So they may be able to come back into our neighborhoods, but it also, what I find is when you have a lull or a lapse or a change, you'll see many of that housing get redeveloped. Landlords will now invest in it because they have maybe a breath of one semester where they have maybe their building empty or some of their apartments empty. So they'll reinvest, or they'll transfer ownership. Oftentimes when properties ownership transfers, upgrades are made. But I do think that's where our need is that, so the long answer to your question is no, there's not enough, but there's some opportunity out there as well to make more happen with what we have. Upgrade those apartments, get the lead paint out so they're safe to live, retrofit them so they maybe could handle someone with a walking disability or in a wheelchair. And if you look at New Hampshire Housing's report, they're now at the stage of, okay, we know what the problem is. How do we garner and readjust our resources to make it happen? And I was on the committee that began those policy questions, and so I'm hoping to bring some of those resources right back here home to this area.
So if a person wanted to get involved or wanted to support those kinds of efforts, where
Sure.
we're repurposing some of these buildings here in our very own region,
Right.
Putting them to good use, and I drive by them every day.
We all do.
The ones that are standing empty, and you
Right.
keep thinking to yourself, how could we really use this for the common good of the region? Whether it's the workforce or the elderly or the young, I think of our young adults, and
Sure.
housing is so challenging
It is.
for that population. So how could a person get involved with that? How can they support that?
Well, I think call me. My phone number's been on the screen, 719-4208. I'll take all calls, and I'll return calls too, which I think is an important part of life, is to show up and return phone calls. If you do those two things, you're going to put yourself in good stead with people. So that's a good thought. I would also, if you're in the city of Keene, I would contact your ward counselor or your counselor at large. If you're in a small town, I would talk to the Board of Selectmen. But if folks have ideas or see the needs, I'd like to know about it, because I think we're going to go into that mode next. I think as much as we're going to create new, we're also going to start taking care of what's existing. And I think that's a great place to put resources. Reinvest in your community. United Way is making a big effort to reinvest in our children, and I think both of those are very laudable goals, laudable issues, and because if you invest in what you have, be it your population or your housing stock or your community in general, and it's the way I have always sold the United Way, is that's what you're doing when you give to the United Way. You're investing in your community, simply put, and the benefits, the rewards are reach out to the whole community. We live in a tremendous area, and I think of the country. I've lived in other places, and we have it all here. We really do. But it's because people are willing to reinvest in their community. Again, be it physical, or be it through the United Way, who supports our not-for-profit organizations across the region to make sure that they're viable. It's an investment that I think is well worth making. We're going to be here, and so again, a long answer to your question is reach out. If you've got ideas, if you're driving by a building every day, like the former Marlborough Elementary School or some of the other things that we've been able to do. Down on Water Street in Keene, we have a development called Cityside. That was the former. I'm going to get the name wrong, but it was a Thomas Hart shoe factory. We have a building on Railroad Street that was a former Princess Shoe Company that we've got 30 units of senior housing in. So we're all about redeveloping what we already have and reinvesting in what we already have. And so I think that's what you reach out to your leaders, reach out to me to see if we can't find a way to do it. We won't have all the answers right away. Sometimes things happen relatively quickly. Marlborough it was except for the fundraising, the concept was immediately embraced by the community, the greater community, as well as my organization. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it's just not as simple as you might want it to be. But it doesn't. It won't start anywhere if the ideas aren't at least floated. And then you got to have patience, because again, you're not going to make things happen overnight. But at the same time, when we were able to do a redevelopment or a new development, it's sustainable. It's going to stay. It's going to stay for the future. One of the most exciting developments I've been part of the last few years, in partnership with Keene Housing, was the redevelopment of the former Cheshire Homes, 75-unit. Affordable housing development smack dab in the middle of Keene. Very important asset. I was on the board of Cheshire Homes for many years, and we knew that we had to do something there. And the reality is that it wasn't an easy fix. It was 40 years old. It was the construction was different 40 years ago. Bringing that up to current code, we found out as a group, it couldn't be done. So we did something that was outside the box, and we took it down and we rebuilt it. But it's going to continue to be an affordable housing, a workforce housing element, 75 homes within what I like to think as a job shed. It's within walking distance to many jobs because of where it's located down on Key Road, and on Ivy Drive and Meadow Road. That it was very much worth reinvesting in. And as much as it wasn't easy with an existing development that was full with people to take it down and repurpose it. It wasn't because we had to relocate people in different areas of the city. It was a daunting task, but we did it, and the board took it on, and Southwestern and Keene Housing took it on, because it was definitely the right thing to do. To let it languish and maybe let it lapse as an affordable housing development was not acceptable. And most of the board of Cheshire Homes were not housing people. They were volunteers, but they knew the value of that. They knew that if that went away, it was going to be a loss of a tremendous asset for this community. So we didn't. We had faith that we could do it. Again, it took a number of attempts to get all the funding together, but the magic happened. The funding came together, the stars aligned, and it's open and full and done. And that will continue to be an incredible asset to this community for many years to come.
You know, there's just so many great things going on, and I want to thank you for coming on and really sharing them. And, you know, I want to remind our audience that, you know, Keith's talking about the great work that SCS is doing, but it requires each of you to be involved in that, to be the creative, be the person thinking outside the box, being the person who reaches out to people like Keith and SCS to say, you know, here, I see this happening out in the community, I see this need, and then to become part of the solution. Because I think oftentimes we turn to organizations because you do great work.
Sure.
And we say, okay, they'll handle it. But it's not just about you handling it. It's really the responsibility of each and every one of us. In whatever way we can give, we can advocate, we can volunteer, whatever we can do to support these kinds of efforts. You know, Keith has put a little bit of a challenge out there to you, audience, and I'll remind you that he's saying, you know, when you're driving by those buildings or you're walking by those buildings and you're seeing them empty, think outside the box. Keith has shared some great concepts here about second chance, you know, really meeting a need out there for people that were coming out of our House of Corrections, the elderly, the workforce, and we have vets now, you know, who we know have some, whether it's mental health or substance abuse, some of the behavioral health issues that have to be addressed.
That's right.
People with disabilities. So this is a challenge a bit out there to you to get involved and figure out how you can give, how you can advocate, and how you can volunteer for these kinds of efforts. So we put that out to you tonight. I want to thank you again, Keith, for joining us.
Very much.
Just super information and such a valuable service going on out there in our region.
Well, we couldn't do it without the community. We couldn't do it without the United Way. We try to live united and work united because I think it is what we need to be. But it does take the community, and we have it. We have the community. It would be great to have more people get involved, support the United Way financially, support your nonprofit organizations, support your local governments, and it's amazing what a dedicated group of people can accomplish and maintain. So that challenge is real, and I think you hit upon a real good point that the more people get involved, the better it's going to be. Absolutely, I'm convinced of that.
And if you can't afford to give, I want to remind you that you can volunteer.
Oh,
Just as important, time is of great value to any of our organizations out there in the community. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Keith. And I want to remind you to give, volunteer, advocate, to live united.